As dusk fell over Texas in 1874, the sky behind the weathered wooden house was stained red by the setting sun. Charlotte Hayes stood motionless on the porch, a cup of cold coffee in her hand, unable to shut out the voices drifting from inside. Her father's voice was dry and unyielding as he negotiated with Clay McGraw, a notorious outlaw known for his brutality. The bargain had nothing to do with money or land. It was about Charlotte herself. Her father agreed to hand over his daughter in exchange for safe passage through Comanche territory. To him, Charlotte was not a person with the right to choose, but a price to be paid. When she tried to resist, she was met only with contempt. Her words were dismissed as meaningless, her wishes crushed beneath the authority of the man who had brought her into this world. In that moment, Charlotte understood that her fate had been sealed behind that thin wooden door. She was not being sold because of poverty, nor because of war, but because of the selfishness and cruelty of her own family. Standing in the fading light of dusk, Charlotte faced a painful truth. In this world, she was nothing more than a commodity to be bargained over, and if she did not save herself, no one else would do it for her. Night settled over the wooden house in a silence so tight it was almost suffocating. Charlotte leaned against her bedroom door, a kitchen knife hidden in her sleeve, listening for the smallest sound. She knew they would come, at dawn. She also knew that if she stayed, her fate had already been decided. So when everything finally went quiet, Charlotte chose to run. She slipped the door open, bare feet touching the cold ground, and sprinted toward the stable where the horse was still saddled from the afternoon. If she could just get into the saddle, she could vanish into the darkness. Freedom was only a few steps away when she was yanked backward. A rough hand grabbed her hair and slammed her to the ground. Her father stood over her, his fury erupting like a storm. He used violence to assert his ownership, crushing every trace of Charlotte's resistance. In his eyes, she had no right to choose, no voice, only an obligation to obey. The insults cut deeper than the blows, carving into her the crushing sense of being completely stripped of agency. As Charlotte lay motionless on the ground, her breath coming in broken gasps, she understood that tonight she had lost. But deep inside her, something else took shape. If she could not escape, she would have to survive, and one day she would reclaim the right to decide her own life. Before dawn had a chance to break, hell came crashing down. Gunfire ripped through the night, followed by screams, pounding hooves, and the stench of smoke spreading across the ranch. Charlotte jolted awake in panic, the knife still clenched tightly in her hand. When she ran outside, the sight before her froze time itself. The stables engulfed in flames, the ground soaked in blood, and her father lying motionless on the cold earth, an axe buried deep in his chest. Riders in war paint swept past the porch like a storm. Charlotte stood, rooted in place, too drained to run. In the chaos, a young warrior broke from the group and moved toward her. His gaze was sharp, but not driven by mindless slaughter. Charlotte raised the knife in desperate instinct, yet he did not attack. He turned away, pulled the axe from her father's body, then returned to his horse. Before leaving, he held out his hand, a brief, decisive gesture. Go. One word. No promise. No threat. Charlotte looked around at the ruins and realized she had lost everything. She let the knife fall, placed her hand in the stranger's, and climbed onto the horse. As the hooves carried her away from the smoke behind them, Charlotte understood that her fate had just split onto a new path, unsafe, uncertain, but for the first time, one she had chosen herself. They left the scorched land just as the sun rose above the horizon. Charlotte rode behind the unfamiliar warrior, her hands gripping the saddle as the wind tore past her ears, as if trying to erase the past. No one spoke. There were no explanations, no promises of what lay ahead, only a long road stretching between grasslands and ravines, carrying her farther from the place that had once been called home. It is not up here. The other riders soon closed ranks, moving with disciplined precision and complete silence. Charlotte watched them in uneasy confusion. There was none of the chaos or savagery she had been taught to fear. Instead, she saw tight cohesion and a cold, controlled discipline so unlike the men she had known all her life. By midday, the group crossed a ridge and descended into a hidden valley, lush and green, eerily calm. When the horses finally stopped, Charlotte slid to the ground, her legs giving way from exhaustion. The warrior who had brought her there caught her before she collapsed. His voice was brief, offering no comfort. She was still weak. For the first time in years, Charlotte realized she was neither bound nor commanded. She was not free, but she was no longer a piece of property being escorted from one owner to another. Before her lay an unfamiliar world, frightening, unpredictable, but at least it did not begin with submission. Charlotte woke in an unfamiliar place, lying on soft animal hides spread across the floor of a low tent. Her body ached from the long journey, but what unsettled her most was the feeling of not being imprisoned. There were no ropes, no guards, only the scent of smoke and wild grass, and the strange quiet of early morning. When she stepped outside, Charlotte saw that the Comanche camp was already awake. Women tended fires and prepared food. Children ran between the lodges. Warriors cared for their horses and weapons in focused silence. No one shouted at her. No one showed open hostility. That orderly indifference left her both relieved and uneasy, as if she existed, but did not yet belong. A young girl handed Charlotte a neatly folded set of deerskin clothes. No explanation, just a nod. Charlotte changed, leaving behind the torn dress stained with smoke and blood from her past. When she stepped out in the new clothing, she felt the eyes on her, cautious, assessing, but not contemptuous. From the edge of the camp, the warrior who had brought her here, Takota, watched in silence. His gaze was neither guarding nor protective, but expectant, as if waiting to see whether she would collapse or stand her ground. Charlotte understood then that she was not a prisoner, but not free either. She was in between a fragile pause where her fate had yet to be decided, and for the first time, she had the chance to prove who she truly was. Night settled slowly over the camp, firelight flickering across silent faces. Charlotte sat by the flames, eating small portions of simple food, the feeling of being watched keeping her on edge. Across from her, Takota sat quietly, his gaze fixed on her without wavering. The silence stretched until Charlotte could no longer bear it. She asked him directly, her voice low but firm, why he hadn't left her behind at the burned-out house. Takota didn't answer right away. After a moment, he spoke slowly, in halting English, saying that he had seen her crying though no tears had fallen. To him, it wasn't a sign of weakness, but of someone who had been imprisoned for far too long. His words struck straight at the pain Charlotte had always kept hidden. She wanted to argue, to say that he knew nothing about the years of control, the bruises concealed beneath clothing, the enforced silence. But she didn't, because in that moment, she realized Takota had seen something no one else ever had. He told her to sit closer to the fire. The night would be cold. Not an order, not pity, just a simple reminder. Charlotte did as he said without noticing when her guard began to soften. For the first time in years, she wasn't being forced to be strong or obedient. She was acknowledged as a human being, not weak, just searching for a way out. The camp's quiet was torn apart in the night by a warning cry from the hillside. Charlotte jolted awake, her heart pounding as the thunder of hooves and sharp commands rippled through the camp. Takota was already on his feet, issuing short orders in a decisive language, pulling everyone into position like a machine forged from discipline and hard-earned experience. A scout rider returned, exhausted, carrying a name that sent ice through Charlotte's veins: Clay McGraw. He had picked up her trail and was leading a band of gunmen toward the valley. The past she thought she had buried surged back to life this time with more men, more violence, and the certainty that she was still prey. Takota turned to Charlotte, his gaze heavy and unflinching. He said plainly that McGraw was coming because of her. Charlotte didn't deny it. Her jaw tightened as memories of McGraw's mocking laughter and possessive stare flooded back. But instead of fear, a cold anger rose within her. She said she was ready to face him. Takota studied her for a long moment, as if weighing every breath she took. Then he turned back to the warriors and began organizing the defense. In that instant, Charlotte understood that the unavoidable storm had arrived. This time, she was no longer someone hunted in silence, but the catalyst for a confrontation that would decide who she would be when dawn came. The warriors gathered into a tight circle, as Takota's voice cut through the air, short, precise, decisive, assigning roles. Scouts would slow the enemy's advance, the rest would hold the valley. Charlotte took a step back, bracing for what she knew too well, being pulled from the front line, told to hide, to stay silent. But it didn't happen. Takota turned to her and held out a bone-handled knife, sharp, balanced, unmistakably real. He said that if she chose to stand with them, she would fight with them. No coercion, no mercy, just a choice. Charlotte looked at the blade, feeling its cold weight in her hand. She knew taking it meant accepting danger, accepting blood, but refusing meant returning to life as someone always running. Charlotte closed her fingers around the knife. She no longer stood behind anyone. She stepped into the warrior's circle and felt their eyes on her, not pity, but assessment. For the first time, she wasn't being protected because she was weak. She was being accepted because she was willing to stand. In that moment, Charlotte was no longer a prisoner or a burden. She was part of the storm about to break. Do you think Charlotte's choice was brave or reckless? If you were in her place, would you take the knife or choose to hide? Leave a comment and share your perspective. Before dawn, the canyon lay under a heavy, suffocating silence. Charlotte crouched low behind cold rocks, her breath sinking with the frantic rhythm of her heart. She felt the enemy before she heard them, faint tremors through the ground, the clink of metal, the confident voices of men who believed victory was already theirs. Clay McGraw rode at the front, his arrogance unchanged, as if this valley already belonged to him. The signal came and the land itself seemed to wake. Arrows cut through the air. Horses screamed as chaos erupted. Warriors surged from the darkness, fast and precise. Charlotte moved with them, no longer frozen by fear. She fired, dodged, disappeared into cover, doing exactly what she had learned in those brief, brutal moments. Every movement was sharp, deliberate. A man charged at her, axe raised high. Charlotte sidestepped, slashed with her knife, feeling the resistance as steel tore through cloth and flesh. She didn't stop to look. Takota appeared at her side, the two of them moving in perfect rhythm without a word, covering each other's backs, shifting positions, pressing forward. When the first sunlight spilled into the canyon, the gunfire began to fade. The survivors fled, leaving behind a battlefield thick with dust and blood. McGraw was gone, dead or escaped. It no longer mattered. Charlotte collapsed from exhaustion, her hands shaking. Takota knelt beside her and spoke simply. She had fought as one of them. And in the silence after the battle, Charlotte knew she had been defined not by words, but by what she had done. As the campfire burned down to glowing embers, the valley slipped into a rare moment of calm. The air still carried the scent of smoke, wild grass, and blood, but fear had withdrawn. Charlotte sat quietly by the fire, a blanket draped loosely over her shoulders, her body aching, yet her mind clearer than it had ever been. She had survived not by hiding, but by choosing to stand. Takota stood at the edge of the camp, his silhouette blending into the moonlight. When Charlotte approached, he told her the danger had passed, at least for a long while. She asked the question that had haunted her since the fighting ended. Who would she be now, when everything had settled? Takota answered that the choice belonged to her. She could leave, or she could stay. No orders, no ownership. Charlotte looked out over the open valley, a place she had once entered with nothing left to lose. Now, it offered her something real, a choice. She said she wanted to stay, not out of duty or fear, but because she had found something she had never known before, respect and the right to decide for herself. Takota placed a symbol of the tribe into her hand, a quiet gesture of acceptance. From that moment on, Charlotte was no longer the girl who had been bargained away. She remained with her own name, not as a prisoner, but as someone who had stood, fought, and chosen her own path.